Hey there everybody, just a quick disclaimer before the video gets started. The content of this video may not be suitable for younger audiences or anybody with anxiety or fear about isolation, the dark, or the forest. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Turn it off. I sat with my arms folded behind my head, skim reading the credits of the movie I'd just watched. After seeing them through about halfway, I lifted myself from the sofa and walked to the kitchen, stretching my arms out above me. I opened the fridge door and found a full carton of juice, so I sat down on the kitchen counter by the window, cracked open the lid, and took several long gulps. When I couldn't drink anymore, I gasped to let new air in and wiped my mouth and the back of my hands. My evenings were pretty uneventful around this time in the summer. It was around 9:15 on a Saturday in July. School was out for the holidays, and my parents had gone to visit my aunt and uncle who live by the coast. They'll still be gone for 2 more weeks. They invited me to come with them, but I didn't feel like it. I didn't dislike the place, or my relatives, but we usually stayed there so long that I'd miss most of my summer break, and I'd truthfully rather spend it with my friends here in town. I was a good kid, though. I knew how to wash my clothes and use the oven, and I'm generally not an idiot, so they let me stay at the house so long as I kept it clean. As I sat, I looked out into the garden to check for anything scary in the dark. It was empty and black. I kinda wished we had a pet. A dog or a cat would be nice about now. But their hair always makes me sneeze and my eyes get red and itchy. With that in mind, my dad always said no, even though I wouldn't really mind it. 9:22. I put the rest of the juice back into the fridge and went back over to the window. Hoisting myself up on the counter again, I glanced out at the garden and identified the shadows one by one to make sure everything was still in its place. The bushes were their usual shape. 2 small trees stood together by the back fence, and a metal table with 4 chairs sat casually on our patio. I liked to check these things, which is largely why I wasn't scared of the dark. I'd always get up to investigate small noises in the night, and I hated sleeping with my face to the wall. If someone was in my room at night, I'd rather know about it, so at least there was the faintest chance of getting away somehow. This meant that my worries were quickly put to rest as I either found nothing downstairs but the radiator popping with the heat, or opened my eyes to see an empty bedroom. Not knowing what could be making the odd noises coming from the kitchen, or on the stairs, or in my room, is what always made my skin crawl. 9:30. I got down from the counter and wandered back into the living room to turn off the TV, and decided to take the rest of the juice with me upstairs. I went back into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stopped. I could see that there was somebody standing there. I shut the fridge door and turned off the light so that they couldn't see me easily, and moved slowly to lean on the kitchen counter to get a better look. All the doors were locked, and all the neighbors were home. I took a moment to remind myself that. Still, my heart quickened a bit as I stood there straining to see his or her shape in the darkness at the end of my garden. I had to keep glancing away to keep their fuzzy outline clear in my head. They were standing very still, and were a little thin, but that's all I could see. I couldn't tell anything else. "Oh," I said aloud. "It was the garden umbrella leaning up against the back fence. I forgot we used it for a barbecue last week." I smiled at myself, pleased that I didn't get too worked up, and went upstairs to my bedroom. I laid on the bed and propped my head up on the pillow, opening my laptop on my stomach to see if anybody was online. Apparently, somebody else was bored and saw my name pop up. I quickly got a message from my friend Chris. Hey, you okay?" "Yeah, bored. Are your parents still away?" "For a couple more weeks. Why don't I come around?" "I don't want to be rude, but I kind of can't be bothered to hang out tonight. Thanks, though." "I know what you mean. It's cool." "What about tomorrow?" "Yeah, that sounds a bit better." "Cool. I'll be around about 1. I've got some family stuff in the morning." "Okay. Do you still have that tent, by the way? We can camp in the garden or something." "Aw, slumber party? I love you too, bro. Whatever, man. You got the tent, though?" "Yeah, somewhere, I'm sure. Hold on, I'll go check." I got up from my bed and headed to check the cupboard underneath the stairs. I didn't know where the tent was, but that seemed a good place as any to start. I opened the cupboard door and started shifting coats aside. and some cardboard boxes were stacked up at the back that might have been hiding it, so I started unstacking them. I took out a couple of easy-to-reach ones and had a stroke of good luck as the tent's bag came into view. I leaned over the other boxes and picked up the bag. I took the big garden umbrella that sat beside it too, just in case it rained tomorrow. But looking at this umbrella reminded me of the silly thing I'd done earlier with the shape in my garden. I looked back towards the window. I paused. I put the tent down. It took me a couple of seconds to get back to the kitchen window and focus on the darkness outside. My eyes weren't yet adjusted to the dark again, so I couldn't see all the way to the back fence. I shut the kitchen light off again and leaned on the counter to continue staring at that same spot. The other garden's features slowly began to fade into view, one by one, fitting my previous image. I wasn't sure what I wanted to see. The darkness gave way to familiar forms I knew, but after a while I was certain there still stood a figure against the back garden fence. It hadn't moved. I stood there for 15 minutes looking at it. I couldn't tell its shape properly, but it did look like someone was standing there. I decided it wasn't a threat. I thought if I was in any real danger, I would have been a lot more worried by now, and that thought kept me calm. But I also wanted to know what it was. I couldn't just stay there forever, so I jogged upstairs, picked up my laptop, and brought it down with me back to the kitchen counter. Hey, could you come around now, actually? Oh? Yeah, I think I can see something in my garden. What is it, an animal? No, it's tall. I thought it was an umbrella, but I saw that somewhere different. You're sure it's not the umbrella? I don't know, I thought it was someone, but now I'm sure it's not a person. It just looks weird, and I don't think it was there before. Before when? I don't know, earlier today? I can't remember. Are you scared? Not necessarily, but I'd feel better if someone was here with me. I get what you mean. I did offer to come around, and I am bored. So, yeah? Yeah, I'll come soon. Cool, thanks. Make sure you use the front gate, though. I sat there watching the black shape lean against the fence for another 10 minutes. Eventually, my doorbell rang. I opened it, and Chris moved in. Hey, come on, look, over here, I said, pushing him and walking him towards the kitchen. I shut the light back off and pointed in the figure's direction. Look. Give me a sec, he said. I can't see properly. A minute later, he noticed. That black thing? Yeah. We both stood there looking at it for a while. I half expected it to be gone when he looked. He leaned over the counter. It's just a big plant or plank of wood or something. Let's go watch TV. Will you check with me to make sure? I asked. Do you have a flashlight? No. Well, we could check if we keep the kitchen light on and open the back door a little, he offered. I thought for a second and agreed, but I said we should stay right by the house. We slipped on our shoes and opened the back door, stepping out onto the patio. The air was heavy and warm. Chris walked out behind me and we stood very close to the door, peering at the back fence. Should we... I had just started speaking when he quickly stepped into the house again, still looking at the fence. What? I asked, following him in. I turned, and I realized that the figure was gone. It was obvious from the light coming from the back door, that the fence and the rest of the garden was just as it always was. Where is it? Chris said. If it was leaning against the fence, it probably fell over into a bush or something. I tried to convince us both. We stared out for a few seconds longer and decided that we were too nervous to go and check. I don't usually give in to my little fears, but now they were just beginning to click in my head. Can you stay the night? I asked Chris. Yeah, sure. I could tell he didn't really want to. He kept his eyes on the back fence. We both went inside and locked the door before going up to my room. I got Chris out a sleeping bag and drew the curtains without looking outside into the garden again. We talked about stupid stuff for a couple of hours to take our minds off the garden, and then we fell asleep. In the morning, I found Chris's sleeping bag empty. I called out to Chris and he said he was downstairs, so I threw on a t-shirt and went down. Sleep well? I asked. Yeah, pretty well, but I kept thinking about the garden and stuff. Hey, did you find that tent, by the way? Oh, yeah, I answered, remembering that shape I'd forgotten until now. Well, I was thinking about the camping thing and thought maybe we could bring the tent to my house. It'd just make a change, you know. I didn't have to ask him why, and I wasn't too keen on staying in my garden either after last night. Wait, last night? Come to think of it, the sun was up, and I wanted to check the garden while it wasn't pitch black. I asked Chris, and he hesitantly agreed. We put our shoes on and stepped out into the garden. I don't know what we were so worried about. It was bright and colorful. The plants and bushes around the edge of the garden smelled good, and there was a bird in one of the small trees singing. We walked to the back fence to find nothing out of place. We looked in the bushes in front of the paneling to check if anything lay behind them, but we found nothing. I walked around the edge of the whole garden once more while Chris tried whistling to the bird. It cocked its head from side to side, trying to figure him out. It was a warm day, perfect for camping that evening, we decided. We talked as we filled a couple of rucksacks with sleeping bags and some food from the kitchen. We didn't want to set up a fire, so we packed some tinned hot dogs, bread, a packet of tomatoes, and some chocolate, as well as some bottles of water. There's a forest just next to my house, which is actually pretty good, Chris explained. Our garden backs onto the edge of it. I stayed in a tent there once with my dad for the first little camping trip I went on when I was, 7? I remember I was so excited, I thought we were really roughing it like some hardcore mountaineers. Chris laughed at himself. If we get too cold or need more food, we can just go back into my house. My parents are out, so we'll have free run of the place anyways. Yours are away too? I questioned. It's their anniversary, so they're out for the night, he explained. They're staying in a hotel the next town over, but they'll be back in the morning. Apparently leaving your kids behind was in fashion this summer. At about noon, we left my house with 2 rucksacks, a sleeping bag for each of us, and the tent, and made our way to Chris's house. It was fairly close by, a part of the same neighborhood. We talked and joked a lot walking side by side, nodding and greeting a couple of familiar neighbors as we went. It was a crazy nice day. The sun was almost too much, it was hot on our necks, and the trees by the sidewalk seemed to glow green from underneath as the sunlight passed through the leaves. A sprinkler offered us some water as we walked by one house, and it felt good on my hot arms. I was already sweating by the time we got to Chris's place, even though we hadn't been walking for more than 20 minutes. We didn't go inside his house immediately because of how hot we were, so we went straight to his garden and dumped our bags in the shade. He wasn't joking. The gate of his garden backed straight out into this impressive forest. Very tall, thin trees stood high above the house and continued as far as I could see. Some bushes and shrubs littered the forest floor, but most of it was either grass or fairly smooth sections of dirt. I didn't see how he could classify this forest as small, though. "Looks good, right?" he boasted. "It's awesome," I admitted, opening the gate and surveying the area. I walked out in between the trees and found a flat spot for the tent. I turned around to ask Chris's opinion and paused, a little disappointed. It didn't really feel like camping when his house was so obviously in our faces. "Let's go a little further in so at least it feels legit," I said, walking back to pick up my bags. We walked in a straight line from Chris's house and kept checking behind us until the house was just about obscured by trees in front of each other. We'd only gone a very short way in, but the forest was already thicker and greener here. There was even a long rope swing hanging from one of the trees, but it looked too old to hold our weight, so we decided to keep our spines unbroken and give it a miss. I unpacked the tent and set it up with Chris's help, and we threw our sleeping bags inside. I laid down inside the tent to test it out. It was so warm and humid I had to adjust my breathing for a second. I stepped out again and asked Chris if he had a torch for the evening. "I can do you one better than that," was his response as he took off back towards his house. I was too hot to run after him, so I opened my rucksack and cracked open a bottle of water, downing about half of it before putting the rest back. I laid down on a soft patch of grass and looked up at the canopy. The leaves were shifting gently in the breeze I couldn't feel from down here, and I watched them sway and mesh together until I heard Chris return. "Did you get the torch?" I asked, closing my eyes. The sun shone through my eyelids and colored my vision red. I listened to the soft sound of his footsteps on the grass as he walked past me towards the rope swing. "That's not gonna hold you," I warned as I heard him tug the branch with a small creak. He tugged it, and it creaked in response again. He tugged it once more, and then again. There was a moment of silence as I guessed he was still weighing it. And then another tug. He continued to tug it a few more times, and the creak followed each one. I was sure it wouldn't hold his weight, and I smiled, predicting one big creak and then a snap as the rope or the branch broke. I waited as some final tugs were made. I waited still. "Yo!" I heard Chris's voice coming from his garden. I sat bolt upright, almost spraining my neck as I snapped my head sideways to face his house. He was jogging through the trees holding an electric lantern. I switched my gaze in the other direction towards the rope swing. It was still hanging there, with nothing nearby. I stood up and turned full circle. Nothing in any direction. I mouthed to myself, walking towards the rope. I tugged it gently, but it didn't creak. I pulled it even harder, but it still wouldn't creak. My mouth went dry. I jumped up, grabbed hold, and yanked on it. The branch bent a little as my feet touched the floor, and still it didn't even make a sound. I kept hold of it as I stared upwards at the branches, but eventually the rope gave way under my weight somewhere in the middle, and a soft thud fell in my ears as the thick rope fell in front of me. Chris was rattling the lantern as he came by. I've never used this before. I got it for Christmas for my cousin. She buys some weird presents. Ah, I see the swing is dead. I didn't respond. I continued looking up at the branch with half the rope swing. Hey, are you good? Chris followed my gaze. I thought you'd already come back, I said immediately. I wasn't the type to let things slide with an, oh, it's nothing. What? Someone walked by me and was messing around with the rope swing. Who was it? I don't know. Are they still around? I don't know. I had my eyes closed. I was laying right there, I pointed. But then I heard you shout, so I looked around and there was nothing here. I heard them walk right by my head. I felt a little bit sick. Look, calm down for a second, Chris began. It's the middle of the day. We're 30 feet from my house. And even if it was a person, so what? It's just some public woods. Anyone can come through here. That made more sense. And he was right about it being public. But then where were they? I glanced around one more time. However, the trees quickly layered and I couldn't see far at all. I guessed it was possible for me to lose track of someone in here for a short distance. Okay, I said. Man, I can stay alone in the house for weeks on end, but I can't handle a short walk through the woods on a summer's day. That's why you brought the muscle, declared Chris, wielding the lantern above his head. I laughed. We spent the day walking around in the forest and returned to the tent to get some water when we were too hot. We talked about school, what our plans were for the future, and the dreams we've had, as well as some ghosts and creatures that lurked in the dark. Neither of us were too scared of things like that, but they made for good camping stories. Chris told a particularly good one, about a woman who lived in the woods. She had the head of a cat, and if you heard her raspy meow, that meant she was trying to find you. And if she stopped meowing, it signified that you were found, and she was quickly making her way towards you. It made my skin crawl a little, and we stopped telling stories soon after that. The light of day eventually faded, and it was getting hard to see, so we headed back to the tent for the night. The impressive heat during the day killed both of our appetites, so we left the food for now and decided we'd eat it in the night if we got hungry. Chris hung the electric lantern at the front of the tent, flicking it on as he did so. It was suddenly bright and spilled a yellow light onto the ground and onto the trees that faced us. The warm glow looked dramatic, but whatever was beyond the light was hidden in blackness. Our immediate area was clear, but after a few paces the light seemed to stop dead. It looked kind of weird. Chris ducked under the tent opening and I followed him. The sleeping bags looked inviting as the heat from earlier had gone and it was too cold for shirts and shorts. We got inside and took the lantern with us. Can you hear meowing? I said, my head tilted as I strained my ears. Yeah, I think I hear some bullshit too. Chris smiled and zipped up his sleeping bag. Damn, I thought I had him. Oh well. I zipped up my own bag and we laid there talking for a little while, and then the exhaustion of such a hot summer's day hit us and we fell asleep. I had this weird dream that we were walking to Chris's house again, but there were more trees than before, and it was getting dark very quickly. I blinked and it was suddenly night, with the forest sprawling in every direction. The rope swing hung in front of me. I turned around and Chris was gone. I heard a creak behind me, and a feeling came over me like I'd missed a step on the stairs. For some reason, I couldn't turn around. I started walking straight ahead, and the rope swing soon came into view again. I was aware I was in a nightmare. The rope swing slowly lifted itself up into the trees, and I watched it disappear. I walked over and stood beneath where it had been, and there was a rustle above me. As I lifted my eyes to the canopy, a black figure with the head of a cat came hurtling down with its mouth open horrifically wide. One of its teeth touched my left eye, and I tore myself awake, gasping as I sat up in the tent. My back was damp with sweat, and Chris was asleep next to me. The lantern was still on, but I couldn't see our backpacks at the end of the tent. I took a moment to breathe and then let myself lay back down, my head thumping on the floor a little too hard. I winced and reached for the bottle of water at my side, downing a few mouthfuls. I couldn't fall asleep with the glow of the lantern on my eyelids, so I sat up and searched with my hands, looking around the tent for it. I quickly realized the light was coming from outside. "Chris?" I said, still confused from sleep. He mumbled something in reply. "Chris, where's the lantern?" Somewhere," he said slowly and sleepily before turning over. Looking around again, the light was obviously coming from outside. I weighed up the options. Either some murderer had snuck into our tent and done nothing but take the lantern, or we didn't actually bring it into the tent and I remembered it wrong. That sounded more convincing. So I knelt by the tent door and unzipped it. From the opening, I looked around, and it wasn't immediately obvious where the glow was coming from. Why couldn't I see it? I looked up. The lantern was resting 20 feet in the air, hanging in the dark. Goosebumps swept across my skin, and I zipped up the door again before shaking Chris. "Chris, please wake up." He heard the urgency in my voice and sat up. "What? What's wrong?" he said, rubbing his eyes. "The lantern's hanging outside." "But I brought it in," he assured me. I felt sick as my reasoning broke. We both looked at the front of the tent. "We should go back to the house," I said, my resolve buckling. I was just a kid in the forest whose parents were away after all. "I'm not walking through the dark," he replied. Chris was now looking worried. "We've got a I stopped myself. We looked at the front of the tent again. We were getting scared as we sat there doing nothing, so this was the plan. We weren't going back to sleep. We'd get the lantern back somehow, leave everything here, and spend the night in Chris's house. I hated always being the one to go first. I wanted to turn back even just crouching by the tent entrance. Unzipping the fabric door, I looked around, and nothing. I peered over the tent behind us, still nothing in sight. Literally nothing. Everything was black outside of the light. I took a step out, and it was cold. Chris said the same as he stood right by my side, looking over his shoulder. He turned back and saw the lantern in the air. We stood there, looking at it for a second that seemed to crawl by. Eventually, I worked out which tree it was hanging from. The broken rope swing at my feet confirmed it. Way up out of reach, the lantern hung above our heads, tied to the other end of the rope that still dangled in the darkness. I couldn't work it out. It was high up. Too high up for even a ladder. The trees were thin and bare beside the leaves that made up the canopy. There was nowhere to climb. Picking up the length of rope that had snapped off earlier, I bundled it and tied a knot, and aimed at the lantern. I took a step back and jumped, tossing it into the air. It caught the lantern on its side and sent it swinging. It threw shadows around us, and I suddenly wished I hadn't hit it. The light made the shadows lean from side to side with the lantern. The horrible, unnatural swaying made me panic, and my eyes became wet as fear took hold of me. I picked up the rope again and lobbed it desperately at the lantern. I missed, and the bundle of rope went sailing off into the darkness. Helplessly, I turned to Chris, who had already grabbed his backpack. He spun around and threw it with a yelp, and it hit the lantern dead on. It fell and thudded to the ground with a crack, but the light was still on, so I ran to pick it up. I turned to Chris and almost cried with relief. "Okay, go, 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 let's go," I urged, and he started jogging quickly towards his house as I followed. We half ran, half stumbled off into the darkness, checking over our shoulders and working ourselves up as our thoughts were consumed by everything that may be waiting in the trees for us. I don't know how long we were moving, but it soon became apparent that Chris's house was not in this direction. "For God's sake, where is it?" Chris said, tension taking hold of his voice. "We'll have to find the tent and try again." A couple of tears were forming at the corner of his eyes. They were probably on mine, too, but my heart was thumping so hard I didn't notice. "Okay." I took a breath and we turned around, headed in a straight line directly behind us. What if we didn't find the tent? I couldn't stop thinking that over and over as we retraced our steps. We walked for what seemed like twice as long before the light finally fell on the side of the tent. We ran up and stood close by its side, looking around to try and figure out which direction we should go. The silence was like the buildup of a nightmare right before something horrible lurched out at you screaming. The comparison made me gag and I scrunched my eyes shut, the hair on my skin lifting. My temples were so hot it felt like my brain was busting against the insides of my skull. I couldn't begin to guess where the house was. We could see about 10 feet from the lantern, and then pitch black. There were no clues. Every direction looked wrong. Chris took the lantern from me and walked around in a small circle, straining his eyes to try and see. I stayed put. "Chris, turn it off," I whispered to him hurriedly. "What?" he asked. I stepped quickly and quietly towards him, bringing my face to his. "There's something in the tent." That was part 1 of Turn It Off. I hope you guys enjoyed. The credits to all sounds and images that I used will be down in the description below. And keep a lookout for part 2 soon.